Money, money, money must be funny in the rich man's world. You did everything right. You saved, you invested, you did not touch it. And you're still far away from being free. Because enough was always a moving target.
I'm 59 years old. I have now built up about $2 million in my retirement plan, and I still can't quit. In fact, it's so bad that even my financial advisor won't give me any indicator of when I can actually quit. It's like, at this rate, I might have to work till I'm 70.
$2 million and still trapped? Chris found out the hard way through his life and career what it really means to be financially free. He hit rock bottom twice.
And I can't even bring home money to pay my family.
He retired once at 28 but had to rebuild everything again from the scratch and realized through building himself twice into being financially independent what it really means.
Net worth is worth less than passive income. Net worth is always worth less than passive income.
What if that number in your account that you check and refresh multiple times, that number is not the key to financial freedom, but it is what it pays you right now is the key to being financially free. In our conversation today, let's learn about financial freedom, passive income, and what it means for money to be funny in a rich man's world. Let's dive in. If you're someone who's earning really well and you still feel that money slips through your hands, you're doing everything right financially, but it's still not working out, then today's episode with Chris is going to change the way you think about money. And his t-shirt tells us that he loves passive income. Welcome, Chris, to the conversation.
Thanks. I do love passive income.
Who doesn't? Who doesn't?
That's true, right?
Yeah. As soon as this word, and we were talking about just before we were recording this, as soon as we think about passive income, and maybe let me just step back. What do you think is a financial habit, Chris, that you've seen people, which I was also talking about, that keeps them stuck in today's economy, even if they're earning really well?
Yeah, I would say this is that you've been taught by most financial advisors, financial experts, institutions, that your entire goal in life when it comes to your money is to save it, spend nothing, save everything, save it forever, and then hopefully someday you're going to have something to live on, right? It's always this accumulation type of mentality. I call it accumulation theory, because the truth is that what I've noticed in my own real life experience, especially having been in the money space for almost 25 years, I've seen that the reality is people don't become financially free using that method. They save and they slave away and they save it forever and they hope that they can live on this big, huge nest egg when they have to pull out less than the interest. And what happens, you get people that literally save into this, sometimes millions of dollars, and then find out that's just not enough. And especially for those that are high income earners, it's even worse because they think that because they have a bigger balance, that things are enough. But then you get, like I had a guy that came to me recently. He said, Chris, like I've made good money over the years. I'm 59 years old. I have now built up about $2 million in my retirement plan, and I still can't quit. In fact, it's so bad that even my financial advisor won't give me any indicator of when I can actually quit. It's like, at this rate, I might have to work till I'm 70. And I said, well, one, congratulations, $2 million. You're the top, like 1% to 2% of all Americans that have saved that much money, because very few ever have. But isn't it interesting that even the financial advisor doesn't know how to get you there? Because the truth is, if you have $2 million, you're only supposed to pull off 3% a year. So that's only for you $60,000 a year, but you want $200,000 a year to live on. He's like, yeah, that's right. I'm like, well, either you lower your expectations a lot, or you do something different. And I did show him later. I said, actually, if you do it this way, more what I call the acceleration method, you start to focus on creating income, specifically passive income, as my shirt says, right? Like investment passive income, where your investments work harder than you do, and they actually pay you income on a monthly or quarterly basis. What you'll find out is that you could probably, instead of waiting till you're 70 to have to keep working or longer, you could probably retire this year. And he says, Chris, I don't mind working until I'm 70. I just want to have the option to not work until I'm 70. I want to know that I'm free even when I'm working, because I don't mind working. I actually like it. I'm like, great. That's what you want. You want options. And when you create more cash flow in your life, you have more options. And when you have more options, that's when you have more financial freedom.
Amazing. I love that framework and I love the simplicity. Let's talk about in our episode today, how can we help someone who's listening to us right now retire this year. I'd love to. And I love the definition that you gave of retirement there, that I need to have the option and the freedom to choose what I want to do. Love that start, Chris. When we do our podcast, Chris, we start from like the right beginning, right? And so the first question that I want to pose is that if the 8-year-old Chris, the little boy growing wherever he was, if that 8-year-old would come to you right now and have a conversation, what kind of a dialogue do you think will emerge between the two of you?
Interestingly, there probably wouldn't be any dialogue because I was so shy as a kid, I didn't want to talk to anybody. I was so shy that if somebody wanted to take a picture at a birthday party or something like that, I would hide under the table because I was just so shy. I was so shy that in first grade, my music teacher said, "Hey, you should be in Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs." I said, "No." Mm-mm. She's like, "It's okay. You'll be bashful." And all bashful does is he has one line. And I was still too nervous to do that. I did it, but I was like almost ready to puke over myself. Right. So if I had 8-year-old Chris, he probably wouldn't know what to ask. Right. This is the truth. And he probably wouldn't know what but if we were to look back, what would he ask? 8-year-old Chris at that time actually wanted to be an artist. So he probably would think it'd be interesting that I did with money. And probably what his viewpoint of money would be is, are you like Alex P. Keaton from Family Ties, from the TV show that had Michael J.
Yeah.
Fox in it?
Yeah.
Like, do you like just drop money on the ground and you know how to count it? You're like, is this like stocks or whatever? Like, I wouldn't really know. I just knew that, money was kind of even a little bit fascinating to me as a kid, but I didn't really know anything about money because all my dad taught me was to just save it. That was it. Just hoard it.
Yeah. It's interesting how at that young age, the conversations parents have with the child on money kind of lead to a lot of behaviors growing up, right? And so even before we get into passive income, even before we get into like all that you have to share, how does one break through that, Chris? Because let's imagine someone like me, 40 years old, right? And I've had parents, both Indian, both trying to say that let's save as much as you can, put into fixed deposits, you get like 4%, 6%. That's more than enough. Why do you need more? Don't make money the center of your world. So when you've grown up with all those beliefs, where does one start?
I talk about this in my book. I call it the work optional blueprint, right? Which we actually have on Amazon now, became a bestseller there. Work optional is kind of what you said. Like it's having that option to work because you want to, not because you have to, because you have enough passive income to pay for your bills. The first step to start always, there's 3 steps that are mentioned in that book, is get lean, get liquid, and get out. So the first step is get lean. Now, get lean is different than what you might hear most financial people say, where they say, live on rice and beans, and don't spend anything, right? That's not what that means. What it does mean is you start to track your money. Here's what I've noticed. So many people look at their account balances and say, is there money in my account? Great, I can buy that. I can pay for that bill or can do that sort of thing. Even if they're not big spenders, many people just look at the account and say, well, there's money in here, I'm good. But what they don't do is they don't actually go and look at how much money is actually coming in and how much is going out and to where. And so I recommend people start to track their money. And so like in the US here, for example, like we talk about like using different apps. It could be like Monarch or Rocket, money and things like that. You can use a spreadsheet, you can use a notebook. It doesn't really matter, but start to really track where your money's going and for what. And when you start to categorize it, you start to see this is where my money's happening. And then you can start to ask yourself, it's like, okay, is this expense useful in my life? Is this actually making my life better? Because if it's not, maybe that's not where I should be spending my money. Maybe I should spend it somewhere else. Maybe, maybe you're like, I would love to go on vacations, but I can't. But I'm spending money over here like eating out too much, or I'm spending too much money because I'm spending on subscriptions that I forgot about, or apps that renew on my phone that I forgot to get charged on those, or whatever it might be, right? You can kind of pare back, say, great, I'll get rid of this so I can have this in my life. So if you can get lean, it means being a wise steward of your money. Make sure that I'm tracking where my money's going. And I'll tell you from my experience, this was with hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of clients, when they start to pay attention to their money gets better. It's like anything in life. Whatever you pay attention towards will expand and grow.
Yeah.
But whatever you ignore will do the opposite. It'll leave you, right? Because if I ignore my health, it'll leave me. If I ignore my teeth, they'll leave me, right? If I ignore my spouse, she'll leave me. But if I ignore my money, it'll leave me too. But whatever I pay attention towards, it gets better, right? It's kind of like whatever you appreciate appreciates, as they say, right? And that's what it is. Like when you measure things, when you're paying attention to things, you tend to be a better steward of that thing. And so I tell people just start tracking your money. You'll probably find at least a few $100s a month just by literally monitoring it. But then if you start to find ways of like, how can I cut back on certain expenses? And even more importantly, how can I earn more income? How can I create more value for the people that pay for me? That's another part of the equation that most people miss, is that they don't think about what can I do to earn more money without having to give a lot of extra effort, right? It's more about being intentional with how you provide value to people, solve problems for them or serve them. That money comes naturally. So I teach that as well as a key thing when you're tracking your money. So first step, as you asked, is start tracking your money. And then let's start to identify where can I cut back on things that just aren't serving me? And also, how can I increase my means by increasing my income too?
Yeah. Love that. I think I think it's really simple because it's asking you to be aware of where it's like you're in and out. Where is it coming in? Where is it going out? So once you know that, you can try and start to cut down on what's the out. So you make the pool bigger. And then the second step, which I think I've had so many conversations around that, Chris, that how do you really increase your value? Because people have been, I think in this day and age with AI, with the tools available to us, everyone can do something that can add value to the world, and then that indirectly adds value to them. So you're on the step lean and you've figured that out. You're tracking your money, you've used the app, you're doing that. What does liquid mean?
Get liquid means instead of locking your money up in prison, you keep your money in your possession. Most people are taught by financial experts that you're supposed to lock your money into retirement accounts and never touch it, right? It's like a negative 100% return. You throw your money into this account, and on paper or on a computer screen, it looks great, but your daily life does not get better. You're just literally putting that money into those accounts and you lock it away for decades. And you hope it's going to be there when it comes time. You hope you're even alive when it comes time to use that money, because you don't know if you have any guarantee you'll be alive when you're 60 or 70 years old, do you?
Yeah.
So that's one thing. It's like people lock in prison, or people will try to pay down their house too quickly. I have no problem paying down your home, just paying the minimum payment. But if you have a low interest rate, why accelerate it? Have that money in liquid cash, because I learned this firsthand, specifically in the last global recession that we had in 2007 through 2009. I remember that I now understand that I used to be a financial advisor in the early 2000s. I left financial advising when I realized that people weren't becoming financially free, including my own father, who was the penny pinching saver. Well, eventually, I got into the real estate world and I was able to retire myself when I was 28. I had enough passive income coming in that I was work optional, as I say. Well, 2007, I'm teaching people how to do it. And then the recession hits. Our business starts failing. Cash flow is a big issue in my business. So I'm negative cash flow there. I'm also negative cash flow at home because we had different expenses. Kids are growing up more and more. We're having more kids. All these things are happening. And I can't even bring home money to pay my family. So I can't pay the expenses at home. Even the business expenses are too much. And so the first thing I look at is, well, what about my house? My house had $150,000 of equity in it because I was paying it down, thinking whenever I need the money, I can just pull it out. Well, guess what? 2007, banks said, we're not letting you get access to cash anymore. So all that money I had locked in there, I couldn't get to. And I learned a very valuable lesson, is that I could have weathered that storm better if I, instead of throwing all that money into my house, had it in cash in my possession. And that's what I teach people to do now, is instead of locking it up in those retirement accounts where you may not ever be able to touch it ever, or not for a long time, or locking it away in your house or things like that, have money, liquid cash available, not just for emergencies. I had an emergency fund at that time too, but I burned through it as well because I was negative cash flow at that point, right? If I would have been more liquid, it would have helped me relax, make better decisions, not frantic, desperate decisions. I would have made better decisions. So then if you have that money liquid and you have it in cash, whether, I don't care if it's in savings account. We often in the United States, I teach about using what we call infinite banking, which is using a life insurance policy that can actually have a tax-free savings account inside of it that pays better than the bank. So we'll have money stored there, right? We'll do those kind of things. So when you have that money in your possession, now you have options, right? That's what's so important, is that when you lock your money away, something goes wrong. You don't have many options, right?
Correct.
If there's an opportunity, right? Like, especially in the US, like retirement accounts that are at your places of employment, where you're working, like a 401k, for example,
Yeah.
people can't just pull that money out. You have to
Correct.
either get fired, quit your job or something to even get that money out.
Correct.
That's not a good strategy.
Yeah.
So I have people keep it liquid so then we can get it out. And getting it out, that third thing is getting it out into investments that generate and pay you passive, like passive investment income today, not waiting 30, 40 years or more for retirement is what can I do to get money to pay me now? Because remember,
Yeah.
every time people lock their money away in prison in those retirement
It's
accounts,
gone.
they don't get paid anything,
Yeah.
right? They hope it grows, but it doesn't do anything for their daily life. But if you put into an investment, like for example, a rental property, right? If that rental property now starts to pay you income, that's money
Correct.
coming in whether you work or
Correct.
not. That's
Yeah.
income coming in that even if you get laid off, you've now got money to help support you. I'll give you an example. I had a client where he worked for Hollywood, still works for Hollywood, I should say. And of course, we remember 2020. Hollywood shut down for about half that year. Then there was 2023 was a writer's strike, shut down for about half the year. Fortunately, he came to me in 2019 and we said, "Hey, what if we have you start doing different investments?" Now, in this case, he had about 6 different rental properties that we were able to buy with his money
Mm.
that was in the stock market. So he got it
Mm.
liquid. So then
Wow.
he could get out into those properties. So the great thing is, even when Hollywood shut down, it didn't pay for all of his lifestyle. He was still a little bit
Mm.
short, but now
Mm.
his savings wasn't draining quickly. It was draining very
Yeah.
slowly. So we
Yeah.
had the emergency fund for the liquidity, right? And then he had options because he was still having money coming in, even though he wasn't working. So he was able to
Mm.
wait. He even said this. He's like, it was great because some of my friends would take the first job available, even if it was a horrible working conditions, even if it was a bad job. He didn't. He's like, you know what? I can wait it out. I'm going to wait for the right job to show up before I actually jump in. And
Yeah.
that is the power of passive income right now. Everybody talks about future planning in the financial world, but nobody talks about present day planning. What about
Mm.
now?
Mm. I want us to answer that question. What about now? But before we move there, what's the difference, Chris, between making money and actually building a wealth? How do you differentiate between the two?
They're two different skill sets. They really are. Because, for example, I know plenty of people that can make a good income, but they don't know how to build wealth. And unfortunately, even if they are good savers, right? Even if they're disciplined savers and they're kind of building wealth, the problem is, again, that wealth doesn't pay them. Just like that example I gave of that guy that had $2 million in retirement accounts. And he's like, I literally have nothing coming in right now. Like I would have to live on less than the interest, which is just not enough to live on. And that's what I see happening over and over is that you can have a good skill to make good money. This is why when I've known a lot of people that said, oh, I grew up with this neighbor or this uncle or somebody like that, the rich uncle, right? They grew up with somebody that they knew and they're like, yeah, they made a lot of money. So I wanted to learn from them. And or they will say, oh, I modeled my life after them. I became a dentist because they made a lot of money. They could go on good vacation trips that my family could go on because he was a dentist. So I became a dentist too. Yes, I hate my career, but I make good money as a dentist, right? But I'll tell you, I know a lot of dentists and a lot of those dentists that make sometimes into hundreds of thousands a year, if not millions of dollars per year. And yet they don't have an ability to stop working. And they'll even look good on paper. Their wealth, right? Their net worth might be a big number, but they don't feel wealthy. They don't feel like they can just stop working today. In fact, most dentists work until they're into their late 60s, sometimes into their 70s before they can even quit. That's even though
Mm.
they could sell their business and make more
Yeah.
money. They can make millions. But nobody's ever taught them, how do I get my net worth to pay me money? And this is why I say net worth is worth less than passive income.
Mm.
Your net worth is always worth less than passive income. No one cares about how much net worth they have. They care about what's the actual income that's coming on from that. But it's sadly, financial experts just tell you get a big net worth and ideally keep your net worth with them in mutual funds, right? In the stock market, on Wall Street only. That's the only place you should have it is with us because that's where we make our money. That's what they're really saying. But then you have to pull off very little money. Why do you pull off little money? Because one, there's market swings. So you can't pull off too much because you could possibly run out of money faster. But two, if you keep money in there longer, guess who still gets paid? The financial companies, right?
Correct.
And by the way, who pays for all the financial media and the news for the commercials on those news channels? the financial
Correct.
companies, right?
Correct.
So literally they're bankrolling everything to brainwash really the entire world that put your money with us. That's your ticket. Just keep putting your money
Yeah.
away, build up that
Yeah.
net worth. That's the real value. No, it's not. Like freedom comes by having so much money coming in that you work because
Yeah.
you want to, not because you have to.
Correct. So let's get someone there right now. Love the banner that you're at the back is saying, live your life now, not tomorrow. Everyone of our listeners and everyone around the world would agree to your t-shirt. I love passive income, but I've not seen many figure it out, Chris. So why is that? Why are people unable to figure that passive thing out? And then how do we help them?
Well, yeah. I mean, like I said, all the education that's out there about financial education, and I'm saying outside like social media and whatnot, right? But all the stuff you hear from the experts are always about Wall Street,
Mm,
stocks, mutual funds, right? And that's why they never find passive income. The closest that somebody might find in that traditional world is getting like what's called an annuity, right? Where they might pay you a set interest rate, or a bank where they might say, hey, you'll make 3%, 4% a year. Not a lot, right?
not yeah.
And so that's where people are just completely oblivious because, again, Wall Street doesn't want you to know about this whole other world that actually the wealthy have been doing for many, many years. If anybody's ever heard of what's called a hedge fund, right? When I was a financial advisor and I first heard about hedge funds, I said, well, what's a hedge fund? They said, it's basically a mutual fund for rich people. I was
Mm,
like, oh, that sounds awesome. That sounds exciting. What do they invest in? They're like, I mean, pretty much the same thing as us. But that's not true. Hedge funds actually invest in private investments that you can't find on Wall Street, the investments you can't find by going to your financial advisor or your broker, right? These kind of funds, they're like investing in private capital or private equity, like in businesses. They're investing in real estate. They're investing in gold and silver. They're investing in all these kinds of things that make them more money. We call this the alternative investment space, or refer to as Main Street investing, but we've never been taught Main Street investing. There is one person, well, there's more than one person, but there's one person that's the most popular in the space is Robert Kiyosaki. If you've ever heard of the
mm,
book, Rich
yeah,
Dad, Poor
absolutely.
Dad, he
Yeah.
really breaks that. That's where I see most people break free is they read that book and say, oh, this sounds great. Like, I don't want to be the employee rat race person. I want to get out of the rat race. I want passive income. But
Mm,
here's where it falls short. Does Robert Kiyosaki really teach you how to create passive income? No, not at all. And a lot of things he talks about as being passive really aren't passive. For example, in the real estate space, I have a lot of friends that he kind of opened their eyes, and so they became a real estate flipper where they buy a property cheap, renovate it, and then sell it for a higher price. Unfortunately, that's a very active business. Nothing wrong with it from that standpoint. You can make a lot of money doing that kind of business, but it's not passive at all, right? Like you're literally working your tail off.
mm,
You can make good money, but you're still working your tail off. Same thing with like people that are called real estate wholesalers, right? Who act as like middlemen between people trying to sell their property and buy the property. Almost like agents in some ways. Well, those wholesalers, they're legitimate businesses. They'll spend tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars a month in marketing and trying to get more people in that they can call and get into that. Again, it's a business, right? But nobody really teaches you about the passive income, which is where I started changing that. With my Money Ripples podcast, I've actually had my podcast now now I'm going in my 13th season, right? It's been over 12 years now. And that's what we try to go into is like, what are these things you can be doing? For example, I talk about rental properties. Most people think of that when they think of real estate passive income, but that I would call that semi-passive. But you could take it a step further. For example, you can buy a turnkey rental property.
mm,
Turnkey rental property means that there's usually what are called turnkey real estate companies that help you find the property. You don't have to go looking for them on some random site. They just say, hey, here's some properties. And by the way, here's how much money you'll make when you buy it. Here's how much you'll make in rent after everything is said and done.
mm,
Give or take a few dollars, right? And then they help you find the property, they help you get the financing, and then they property manage it for you. So then
mm,
they say, great, you'll have a property manager. So you don't have to deal with the tenants, the toilets, or the trash. You
mm,
just give them that way. So, although that's still a little bit kind of hands-on, but I know for me, I've got some of those properties. Like it's not common for us to get reached out to. Maybe at most a couple times a year on a property,
mm,
right? It's not often. It's not like we're dealing with that on a daily or weekly basis. It's like if you're lucky, a couple times a year basis. Um, and so that's a more passive. Here's another thing that's passive too. That's more popular today, especially with the way that things have happened with interest rates is being a lender. You can lend your money to real estate investors. Essentially, you become the bank. Now, think about this. If you ever have bought a house where you've got a mortgage, a bank mortgage, what happens if you don't make that payment?
You get a
The bank
fine.
takes the
You're fined
property.
for it. Yeah.
Exactly, right? The bank takes the property. They foreclose on you, right? They'll take the property away so they can get their money back, and hopefully maybe they'll even make extra money on top. You can do the same thing. You can lend your money to real estate investors. They might only need it short term, but you can lend your money to real estate investors making 10, 12, sometimes more percent a year. And I first learned this when I was a financial advisor until early 2006. And I realized that when people weren't becoming financially free, including my own father, who did everything right, I said, you know what? I can't do this anymore. I can't teach about this kind of stuff. And so I quit. I vowed never to teach about money again. I said, I will be a mortgage broker and I'll teach ballroom dancing on the side and maybe do a little stock trading. And that's what I did in the early 2006. But when I started to learn about from real estate investors what they were doing, some of those real estate investors said, hey, listen, if you lend me money, I'll pay you at that time much higher than they do today. I'll pay you 2% a month.
Wow.
Now I was like, whoa, wait, hold on. You're saying 2% a month. That means if I have $100,000, you would pay me $2,000 a month? I said, yeah, that's right. I'm like, whoa, hold on. This is blowing my mind because as a financial advisor, because remember I was in that accumulation lie, that we talked about, that theory. I was thinking, if you have $100,000, you can only pull off 3% a year. That's $3,000 a year. You're telling me I can make $2,000 a month. That's $24,000 a year. That's 8 times more with the same money. They said, yeah, that's right. I was like, holy cow, this is incredible. I'm like, is this legal? Like, they've been doing it for generations. This is nothing new. We've been doing it for hundreds of years. So yes, it's legit. But again, as a financial advisor, I was never taught about that world.
Correct.
Well, even today, let's just say you get paid 1% a month. If you have $100,000, you can get paid $1,000 a month on that money. And if they don't pay you, guess what? You can take that property from them. And ideally, there's a lot of equity in that property. So if they don't want you to take the property because they want their money, right? But 2, if worst case scenario, they can't pay you and something goes wrong, at least you can take that property, not ideal, but at least you can take it, sell it, get all your money back and even make more potentially. So that's where a lender can be a good thing. So that was my first introduction beyond rentals was I could be a lender, and that is passive. Think about it. The bank, when you have a mortgage, let's just say that your sink has a leak, right? You call a plumber. You don't call your bank to say, hey, can you get me a plumber, do you?
Correct.
You have to call the plumber because you own the property. You have any issues, anything breaks down your house, you never call the bank. That's what a lender is. They're literally hands off. They're saying, nope, you just pay me. Pay me what I'm owed, and that's it. So that's one of the things that in the last few years, especially as there's been real estate stress, that's one thing that's still done pretty well, And by the way, there's even literally funds you don't have to go in one property. There's certain companies will say, hey, we'll raise money from you and then we'll invest in many properties. And do maybe hundreds of loans inside this fund. So you're not just in one loan, you might be in several, and that's the case. So there's diversification. No, you're not the one that's going to get the property if something goes wrong, but at least now you also get paid a contractual return. People just don't realize wait, I can make 10, 12% a year doing these kind of strategies, And then that's not the only thing too. I mean, shortly, I'll just briefly mention you can invest in apartment buildings. There's self-storage units, which a lot of times when people do shrink or downsize, their junk goes into storage, right? You've also got raw land. I've got a raw land partnership that I've put over $500,000 into, but it's paying out $12,000 a month. Oil and gas is another one. Right now, we've had oil prices going through the roof. If I'm going to have to pay more at the gas pump, it would be nice if I also get paid more on my investments too, right? So might as well take advantage of that. So I have money there. There's things you could do like commercial properties or even warehouses like Amazon warehouses or just commercial warehouses that people store or do their business operations in. They've had no problems during the recession or, during the last 3 years of the real estate recession we've had. So there's so many options that again, I was never taught even as a financial advisor, and I'm supposed to be the money expert. Imagine most people, they're average Americans or other people that have never heard of this either. And that's what we're trying to open up the world to say, there's this whole other world. It's like the Matrix red pill. You take it and there's this whole other world that can actually help you create financial freedom decades earlier than you would trying to save in Wall Street.
Yeah. Here's the interesting bit, right? You're seeing about all of these things, and we can come to more, right? But the one thing that I'm stepping into the shoes of the listeners, and they think, it's too risky. I'm not going to do that. The risk appetite is so low right now. The trust is so low right now, Chris, that people don't want to jump. Yeah. What would you say to them?
I think that's good. I'll tell you, after 2020, between 2020 to 2023, people were throwing their money at everything because the government was throwing money at people, right? And so when the governments are printing money like crazy and just giving people money to say, "Hey, we're going to keep you open because of viruses and stuff," it's the problem is when people got free money, they were careless with it. And they would go and throw their money in things that were just complete scams. I mean, how many times have we heard now in the media now about all these crypto scams that have been out there, right? I mean, Bitcoin for a while was like, that's the thing to put your money in. I knew that Bitcoin was going to have problems when I had a classmate who barely graduated high school said, "How do I buy a Bitcoin? Like, is it an actual coin? What is this thing?" She had no clue what it was, but she heard about it on social media or whatever on the news and wanted to buy it. So it's nice when people get scared a little bit because now at least they're willing to take a step back and think. Fortunately, flip side, the bad side of this equation is that sometimes people will do nothing, or they'll just do what the masses of people do. And there's a quote out there that people attribute to Albert Einstein that says, "The definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results." Well, I've already seen it, and we've already seen evidence of it, that people have been saving and slaving away, trying to put their money in their retirement accounts. And then when they get to retirement, they say, "Well, it's just not enough. I need government help to keep me going," right? So if that's the case, why do we keep doing the same thing? If it worked, wouldn't we see the masses of people actually financially free?
Yeah.
Now you'll hear some people that don't want to believe this. They're like, no, it works. It works. They'll say, "Oh, it's just because people don't save enough." But in my experience, like I see that usually it's about at least in the United States, it's split about half. Is that half the people, yeah, they might spend and blow money, but the other half try to save it. So wouldn't that mean that half of people would be financially free right now? That's just not the case. My dad should have been financially free. He wasn't. He had to work 10 more years until his 70s, until he was forced into retirement. And then he lived the last 10 years, retired on a very, very small budget, right? He couldn't do much. He couldn't travel and do the things he wanted to do. He had to just stay grounded, stay at home mostly, right? He did karaoke singing, or in Japan, karaoke, right? He was doing that. He was fishing and doing stuff, but it was very simple life that he had lived. The things he wanted to do, he just couldn't because he knew he couldn't afford it. That's what people are doing. So why would we follow the masses that have already been doing this for decades and decades? They've been doing the same thing. It just hasn't worked. Why would we do that? That's insanity. So it's hard because the comfortable thing is doing what everybody else does. But unfortunately, that's guaranteed failure. The problem is, yes, there is risk. Like the things I'm talking about, it doesn't mean it's risk-free. I mean, there's always risk and you have to know what you're doing. And that's where we realized there was a way for us to create value as a company, right? Because we realized, listen, like there's people that want guidance and they can't get it from their financial advisor because they don't know what's going on. They don't even know how to do it. And they don't want you to do it because they lose money if you take money out of their accounts and put it in something else. So they're incentivized to tell you to never do those things. So our company, we coach people one-on-one. We say, let's create that game plan. Let's see how we can actually create that work optional blueprint for yourself so you can get out of the rat race, that you can actually find these things. And by the way, people always ask in our group, they'll say, "Well, Chris, who have you invested with? Who have you trusted?" It doesn't mean that we recommend it. We're not investment advisors. I can say, "Hey, here's people that I've looked at that have had a great track record." Some of these people I've even invested with myself, or other people we know have invested with them too and have a good reputation. And that kind of minimizes the risk a little bit. Again, not risk-free because anything can happen. But when people know that they're borrowing my network, right? Versus trying to find it on their own, which could take years and years. I mean, it took me 20 years to develop my network. Why wouldn't it take them 20 years, And by that time, it might be over. And so that's why I try to really help people do that and see it from a different perspective and see like, what could I be doing with my money that could actually be better than just locking it away in those prisons?
Yeah. Fascinating. And I think you're right that on the risk, you can continue with what the world has done and be in the same place, or you could try something new with that slight bit of risk. But if the risk pays off, which guided kind of with guidance will absolutely do. So I agree with that. But the three things that you've said till now, right? The rental properties, the turnkey, the lender, these are all in that property space. What else do you think has worked, which allows people to love and achieve that passive income?
Yeah, there's different categories, right? So there's 4 asset classes when you're talking about
Mm-hmm.
this. There's paper assets. Now, paper assets is like your stocks, bonds, savings accounts, even life insurance, things like that. Like anything that's pretty much what a financial advisor offers is a paper asset, right? Even if you're stock trading, those are paper assets. They're not like they're not the real tangible thing. They're a piece of paper that represents something that's of value, right? Even when people say, "Oh, well, I invest in gold," like gold mining companies. Okay, well, that's a paper asset because you don't own the company, right?
Correct.
Trust me, you can't call up that gold mining company and say, "Hey, I don't like how your profits have dropped. You need to do this,
Mm,
this, and this to fix your profits."
mm,
They're not going to listen to you. They don't give a crap about you, right? Apple, Tim Cook doesn't give a crap about what I have to say. He has no clue. He doesn't care how many Apple computers you have. He doesn't care, right? Those are stock investors. Those are paper assets. They're okay to have, but that's where everybody puts 100% of their money into. The other 3, there's business, right? Having your own business, for example, is an actual investment. That's like an actual asset class. You can invest in businesses that are, not where you're in the operations, you're not in the day to day. You could be the financer, the backer. That's what I do with 2 of my investments, right? I have a raw land company that we buy and sell raw land, but I'm not operating it. I'm financing it. And yeah, it's in the real estate space, but it's different. The other partnership I'm in, a couple of those deals are in oil and gas, right? Which is a commodity. That's another asset class. So it's business partnership, but it's in the commodity space of oil and gas. So like commodity would be the other one, oil and gas, gold and silver, things like that. I also hold gold and silver because I believe that you got to have something to protect the value of your paper assets, such as savings accounts, which don't make much money. Gold and silver can offset the inflation risk that you lose to inflation when you don't make enough in the bank, things like that. And so you have that. And then, of course, real estate is the other one too. I've just realized that over time, I look for things that back it up. And even in the real estate space, like you mentioned, there's so many options there, but it's true. Like there's a real asset backing it up because real estate isn't going away. People still
mm,
need a place to live, just like people need food to eat. By the way,
correct.
food is a commodity. Could you invest in food-based type of business or something like that? You could, right? You could literally invest in food. I know farmers, although their business, their farm is their business, they also, on the side, will start playing the, commodities game. They'll even
Mm,
start buying and selling shares of like fruit, like oranges or whatever it might be, right? Or like grain, so they'll like kind of watch because they're watching the prices in their own business so much. They're like, "Hey, we've noticed there's cycles. We can actually buy paper assets versions of
mm,
what we're doing on our farm," right?
mm.
And it's like, "Hey, if corn seems like the prices are lower, we know it's gonna go up again. Let's buy
Yeah,
corn, so then when
let's buy that.
prices do go up, we don't just make money at the farm, we make money on the fact that those prices go up," right? And so we can buy low, sell high. So there's just, again, so many ways to do it, but when I come back to passive income, usually the ones that are most predictable have a real asset backing up. You can invest in business. There are people that do private equity, and things like that, but I've noticed that even in business, if I'm not the one controlling the business, I feel like there's a higher level of risk in business than there is doing real estate. At least with real estate,
Mm.
they tend to hold value better because it's real, just like gold and silver hold value better. They can go up or down, but they hold value more because they're a real valuable asset in people's eyes, worldwide even. But with companies, it depends, right? And that's why mutual funds and stocks are also unpredictable too.
The home is a physical asset. Like you can see real estate, whether it's an apartment, whether it's whatever. And I resonate with that. One question before we kind of get to our closure. You speak a lot about unlocking those hidden cash flows, unlocking those hidden opportunities, right? What would be like a piece of advice, or what could someone start to do? They've done they've done their tracking. They know where they're gaining money, where they're losing money. But what can they start to unlock cash flow, hidden cash flow?
Yeah, if you go outside of some of those, like we have talked about the 7 secrets, like the 7 main things people do to free up cash flow today. A lot of it are what you find when you're tracking money. But there's a few things you can do. The one I feel like sharing beyond income, because income's a whole other conversation that would take up quite a
Mm,
bit of time
yeah.
because that's the thing that people always want to do, but they don't know how to do it, right? But the one I'll talk about is debt, loans. People often will tell you that you should either pay the loan with the highest interest or the loan with the lowest balance. That's why you have like the income snowball method, the the debt snowball method or the debt avalanche method, right? To distinguish between those two. I actually tell people to ignore the interest rate. I tell them like, you know what? Don't follow either of those particular ones because I learned from my firsthand experience. Remember 2007 and 8, I was losing assets. I was leaking money left and right. I eventually got to a place where I was over $1 million in debt. And when I got any kind of money coming in, the question was this: do I invest that money to make income or do I pay off a loan? And I had to do something to make it an even playing field. How do I make debt look like an investment, right? And what I did is I created what's called the cash flow index. And apparently now it's actually becoming one of the top debt paydown strategies out there taught today. The cash flow index is simply this: I take the balance of the loan and I divide it by the minimum monthly payment. So for example, if I have a $10,000 credit card, that's $200 a month. My cash flow index is 50. But let's just say I also have this low interest $10,000 car loan that I'm paying $500 a month on. The cash flow index is a 20. Oh, before we worry about the cash flow index, the question is this: come back to common sense. If you need better cash flow in your situation, do you pay off and all you have is $10,000, so you can only pick one or the other? Do you pay off the $200 a month credit card or do you pay off the $500 a month car loan? Which one helps your financial health the most?
Interesting. So wherever you feel,
yeah, go ahead.
So sort of like cash flow index is wherever the balance of the loan is higher, you divide that by minimum monthly, and that's what you get. That's the CFI.
That's the CFI, correct.
Yeah, whichever improves your daily cash flow, that's what you pay off.
Yeah, if you think from a common sense standpoint, like to help have more financial health, you want to get rid of the biggest payment first, don't you? It's
Correct.
the payment that creates stress, not the balance, not the $10,000. It's what's coming out per month, right? So most people, whenever I ask that question, I say, hey, which one would make most common sense that would make your situation, your life easier? They said, well, the $500 a month needs to go. I said, but that's low interest. It's not the high interest one. That's the credit card. You should pay off the credit card, right? That's what everybody else says. Yeah, maybe. And then they get confused. I'm like, go back to common sense. They're like, pay off the $500 a month. I'm like, exactly. So this is what the cash flow index is. Remember, 50 for the credit card, 20 for the car loan. You pay off the lowest index first. That's the one you want to pay off because that's the one that's going to move the needle the most. That's the difference, right? It's more bang for your buck. I realized that, like in my situation, especially when cash flow was tight, I didn't care about the interest rate. I didn't care about the balance. I just want to figure out, how do I have more money every month? How do I improve my cash flow right now? That's how you do it. So I've had so many people that they say, well, I've got this 0% credit card, but Chris, it actually has an index of 32. But this other credit card has interest, but the index is a 50. Like, what should I do? I'm like, pay off the 32, even if it's 0%? Yes. I was like, by the way, they raised the payments on purpose on you to do that, but that's creating more stress. Pay that off because on that credit card, that means for every $32 that you have of charge on your credit card, you pay $1 a month, which means if you pay every $32 you pay on that credit card, you free up $1 a month. So if you get an extra $1,000, you can free up $30 on that credit card. But that one that had the index of 50, you pay out $1,000 on it, you only free up $20 a month. You get $12 more a month for free, for no more cost out of pocket. I've had so many people, literally hundreds of people, like when they start to get that, and even we've used things like refinance their house to maybe get cash out, then pay off those things. That's a higher index number, right? And pay off those, or the credit card with the highest index, pay off the lower index ones. So then you don't have to use any money out of pocket. I had a guy in New York, in Manhattan, right? Very blunt, typical New Yorker. And he was broke. I mean, he was making money, but he was broke month to month. And I told him, I said, all right, you got $80,000 of credit card. I'm like, you're going to take this credit card, you're going to pay this one down, you're going to charge this one up. So you're going to charge on this credit card, use the money you save from that to then pay down this credit card here. And it was just moving money around. And he finally just told me, he's like, Chris, you're just moving money around. You're not doing anything. This isn't valuable. I said, well, moving money around is actually freeing up a couple $1,000s a month for you with no money out of pocket. So unless you could pull money out of your butt, I'm like, this is all you got. This is all I have to work with. He's like, yeah, you're right. All right, fine.
Yeah.
It's like, I was like, we're just
Fascinating.
getting creative. We're just trying to figure out
Yeah.
which has a higher index, get more of the money
Yeah.
over there, less to the
Yeah.
lower index so we can free up that cash flow, right? Because he had no money. If he had money in savings, great, we could do that. And I've had people do that. I had
Exactly.
one guy cash out some of his retirement to pay off some of his cars to free up $4,200 a month. That's 50 grand a year. And you know what's crazy? He was so brainwashed by financial advisors. He's like, yeah, but if I cash out $100,000, how am I going to retire? Like, but that, I'm like, what's the purpose of retirement? Isn't it for
Correct.
income? Yeah, well, yeah,
Yeah.
but how am I going to retire? $50,000 a year is how. It freed up $50,000 a year. But how do I retire? It was finally his wife. It's always the women that get it first. She's like, you have 500,000 saved up. 100,000, it's not going to make you broke. This makes
Yeah.
sense. Let's do it. He did it. Here's what's cool. When he did that, he freed up that money. And then we found out some ways to free up money on tax saving strategies here in the US, right? Did that. We freed up about $70,000 a year. Because of that reason,
Wow.
as a business owner, he started to breathe and relax. And you know what happened? Even though, and he was a doctor, by the way, when his patients came in, more patients said yes to becoming his patient. So what's fascinating is that what eventually happened is that he was making an extra just from income too, because he relaxed, because he wasn't worried about making money. People felt that. Even though he didn't have more people coming in his door, more people, the higher percentage of people started saying yes. He had a better patient conversion ratio. So he ended up making an extra $2,000 or $3,000 a month, all because he was able to free up that cash flow to relax a little bit. So in total, we improved his cash flow with that $100,000. We helped him improve his cash flow by $100,000 a year.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a lot of human emotions, fear, how you show up with all that's happening with your money, and beautifully connects. Now, if we go, Chris, to your future self, and you've done this a few times, you've built that past, you're now helping others, but that 80-year-old Chris, the one from the future, if that 80-year-old Chris comes back to you right now and has one piece of advice for you, what would that Chris say?
He'd probably say, well, one, I don't know because I haven't been there, but I would imagine he would probably say, chill out. It's all going to work out in the end, right? Like continue on the path. I probably won't even tell you the path to go on. I would just say, listen to what feels right in your heart and follow that. That's what I imagine my 80-year-old self would say.
That's it's always very grounding and humbling to see that 80-year-old just say, chill out. It's going to be okay. Amazing.
For sure.
Thank you, Chris, for that beautiful conversation. To everyone who's still listening with us, if you're listening to us right now, just remember to chill out. It's going to work out. Keep taking the right steps forward and keep moving forward, because listen to your heart and it all falls into place. Do not ignore your money, because once you ignore the money, then it does not appreciate. The thing that you appreciate is what appreciates. And so make sure that you do not ignore the money. There is a risk appetite that each one of us has, and it'll be different from based on who you are and what your current conditions are. But remember, if something that's not worked for generations before us and has not been able to make them financially free, then it's not going to help you. So you need to try something new, and you can start with taking small steps. I loved, Chris, what you said about net worth is worth less, and you need to make sure that you invest in your now and your future better by taking the right steps. Making money and building wealth, they're two very different skill sets. We need to learn both of them, actually. Then that leads to a good outcome for who we are. There are 3 steps when you want to change your relationship with money. Lean. Track your money. Figure out where it's coming in, where it's going out. Be liquid. Don't put your money off to some saving account for the rest of the 30, 40, 50 years that you'll use when you're 80 years old. You don't know if you'll be 80 or not. And then get out. Find the investments that start to pay you some passive income to start building your life. And to that 8-year-old Chris who was shy, it all worked out really well. Enjoy the moment, enjoy this ride, because it's absolutely worth it. Chris, any final words before we say goodbyes?
Yeah, I think the thing I would end with is that there's always hope, more than most people realize. And so just realize that there's always answers, there's always hope. And if you're going to find anybody to listen to for advice, I like to find those people that have been there, they've done it, but they're still doing it today. Don't find the people that were has-beens that haven't been able to replicate success. They only did it one time, but it was luck. I found those people that recreate that luck over and over and over. They just keep making it better. those are the people I look for as mentors. And those are the people I look for when I watch podcasts and interviews. And that's the same thing I recommend for you as well.
That's such good advice. And if you want to get in touch with Chris, we'll put all the links in the show notes to the link to the book, to his website, everything. Feel free to reach out and have a great conversation. This is Chris and Utkarsh signing off.